Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 14 of the Classical Liberal Project, the official podcast of the Classical Liberal Caucus. My name is Joshua Eckel. I'm the one of the board members at the Classical Liberal Caucus, and I'm joined today, as usual, by our chair, Mr. Jonathan Casey. Good morning or good afternoon.
Hello. It is afternoon.
Yeah.
It feels like morning for some reason.
Good to see you again. We also have a special guest today, Mr. Tyler Harris. Tyler Harris is the former executive director of the Libertarian National Committee. Tyler, thank you for joining us. I'm not sure if you want to give people any more background if I missed anything on your bio.
Sure. Well, it's great to be here. As you said, I was executive director of the Libertarian Party from very late 2020 through to about mid-2022. Prior to that, I had various roles in the party's operations team, most recently prior to being ED as the deputy director of operations for the party. My career prior to working for the LP was in financial services. I was a merchant underwriting head and risk manager for a major company in the merchant services space, where, funnily enough, background involved doing a lot of financial analysis for high risk and at risk businesses. I went into small business consulting after that and then ended up with the party.
Got it.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you for making time for us today. So obviously, the context of this podcast is going to be going over our recent Health of the Party report. And I think it ties back to Tyler's background in a great way, because Tyler not only has a history of doing analysis on this in his career, but he also has the background of being a staffer and working with the Libertarian National Committee and actually looking at these numbers day to day. So I think, Jonathan, not to speak for you, but I think our hope with having Tyler on the show today was to have his perspective on this report, to check our work and make sure we didn't mischaracterize anything, do anything correctly, and we followed the right methodology. I don't know if you have anything to add in that regard, Jonathan, but that's like the way
that's exactly why Tyler's here. He's going to help take a look at things and kind of give a perspective that, especially as somebody who's been on the inside of the party, for a number of years, he can kind of show that perspective and say, these are the numbers that I looked at when I was executive director. This is what's concerning about these numbers, or what's not concerning about these numbers. That he can kind of provide some of that analysis that we're looking at from the outside. We had, probably 8 or 9 people that contributed in some way to the report, and they probably 50 years of experience combined, at least across the Libertarian Party. So we had a lot of people looking at it and helping out with these numbers and looking at what was going on. So I think it'll be good to kind of have his perspective as well on some of these things. So I'm excited to get into it.
Good. Okay. Well, I'm going to hand it off to you to also frame the report, but just for everyone who maybe has not been paying attention, about a week ago, the CLC released what I think is going to become an annual Health of the Party report. And the purpose of this report was to basically tell the public how the health of the membership data, or the membership base, the health of the party, and basically dig into the specific trends that are driving party growth, or party, the numbers that drive party success. The report was viewed over 100,000 times on social, and it did get a lot of attention. I'm probably understating that a little bit. There were a lot of questions that came out of that report when it was released. And so I think our hope, Jonathan, was, correct me if I'm wrong here, is to address a lot of those questions, talk to Tyler about it, go line by line, and get into the specifics. So I'll let you kick us off.
Yeah, I think I'd start, and we'll pull it up here. I'll have you kind of walk us through the report and look at these charts, and
Sure.
We can talk about it. But I kind of want to start out by two main things that have kind of been thrown back to us as far as criticisms or critiques or disagreements on how we view things. The first one being inflation, whether or not we should have adjusted for inflation. And it's a bit ironic to me that the same people who said that the old guard did everything wrong, everything horrible, but then now say, well, we should do the reports exactly like the old guard did. The issue is when you have a small bit, when you have a business, you're looking at 1 or 2, 3, 4 years, pretty much at the max. You're not really comparing yourself to 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so when you are comparing yourself to this, especially when you're doing a 2-year cycle, a 4-year cycle, those cycles start going further and further and further back. So to not just for inflation just doesn't make any sense, because it provides the real true value of the dollars that you're being given, the cost to your to members that they are willing to give to the party. It's a true measurement of what people are willing to give to the party. So there's some argument about whether or not, well, we haven't raised our prices for membership, but in reality, the price for membership is really just a minimum suggested price, a minimum suggested donation. It really doesn't have much more effect than that. A lot of people, in fact, I'm not exactly sure of the numbers because they haven't released it. Many people do give way more than the minimum. That's the nature of a political party. And this isn't a business where we're selling a good to people that's changing in price along with inflation. This is a service. This is a charitable organization almost, of where we're providing a service to people that that they're putting money into, and they feel like they're getting money. They're getting some kind of return of their investment. That's not a physical good. So I think that not accounting for inflation, particularly when we're looking at numbers that are 10, 15, 20, 30 years back, it just makes sense to look at inflation.
I want to take a step back for the sake of the audience, make sure that they understand fully what we're about to jump into. So what you're seeing here is the first page of the report, and we're going to go line by line on each one of these charts. Each one of these numbers were adjusted for inflation. And to Jonathan's point, the point of that was to we're looking at 30 years of data. So we want to make sure that it's accurate, and we're comparing apples to apples. So you're going to see that trend in every report. But before we jump into it and go line by line, Tyler, I know that inflation comment was the number one piece of criticism that I think we heard over and over again. So do you have any commentary to add to Jonathan Casey?
Yeah, I want to jump in on what you were talking about, Jonathan, and there's actually a lot to unpack there, and I'll try to be brief because I know we have a lot to get to. But certainly you guys have made a methodological choice in adjusting for inflation, right? Like, there's a clear decision point. You're applying it consistently throughout the report. I think, given the choice you made speaks to what your data is now going to say, what the scope and scale of what you're looking at is. I think it makes a lot of sense if you're going to be looking at today versus 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that your inflation adjustment is going to put those in terms of roughly comparable purchasing power, right? And so as long as it's applied consistently throughout, I think that's consistent with what your report is going to say. Now, is that the methodology that I, as executive director, would use if I wanted to compare my April numbers to my March numbers, or my February numbers, or my January numbers? Of course, you're not inflation adjusting on a micro scale when you look at business metrics like that. So I think there is you get down into that real zoomed in version. It may make sense to pull back and just look at nominal dollars. Look at has donorship grown? Obviously, if you're going by head count, there is no inflation conversation there. But if you're talking about donor dollars, there's a lot that can impact that. And I do want to speak a little bit also, and I'll be very brief on it, but to the point, this idea that dues have not increased. There's been a lot of discussion that I won't rehash about whether or not that makes sense as a commentary on inflation in general. But more specifically, I just think it is only narrowly correct for those basic bylaws defined sustaining member dues, what most Libertarian Party members know as a basic membership package, that $25 annual membership. That has not increased. Pretty much every other member tier has increased historically over the course of if you look back, I think the last increase would have been 2 years ago, when the premium membership level was added at $60 to replace the old bronze level at $50, and bronze got bumped up and everything else got bumped up into different member tiers. I think there was another adjustment, certainly to the branding of tiers. I'm not sure off the top of my head to the pricing in 2018. So these are things that have happened at regular intervals. And of course, if you want to look at that's the bottom of the scale, the middle of the scale, and now go up to the top of the scale, the FEC, of course, inflation adjusts the maximum contribution that the party can take. So if you want to have a conversation about large donorship and you want to look at it in dollars, there actually is a real sensible reason why you might cycle to cycle back across several election cycles want to inflation adjust to have a conversation about major donor dollars coming in. So it's a slightly more complicated question, which is unfortunately going to, I think, be a motif today as we talk about a number of these things, is that there's a lot of nuance that the sort of simplified, punchy Twitter argument is going to miss. But I think that it's a very sensible choice to inflation adjust something that's going to look large in terms of how long you want to look back on the calendar. And it's just important to read the report with that in mind, knowing that the numbers are inflation adjusted, and that's what they mean. They don't mean the same thing as nominal numbers would mean.
Makes sense. Okay, so that's great commentary. Great
The other
commentary.
thing, yeah, no, that's a really good point. I was not aware that the other membership tiers have increased, so that does kind of do away with that argument that, well, nothing's changed. Well, pricing has changed. If you're going to look at it as a customer model where you're charging a price to customer, it has changed.
Yeah, and I do think there are flaws in looking at it that way. But if you are going to adopt that worldview, then
right,
the premise that it's been static
right,
since whenever the $25 was,
right.
and even that has raised since 1971. Even that has gone up, but it has been 25 for a very, very long period of time.
Right.
But the other stuff has gone up as well.
Yeah, and we are this report. We are trying to give a historical accounting of where the party is. And to do that, you kind of have to adjust for inflation. Moving on to kind of the second critique that I've heard is us going with a 2 years 2-year cycle as opposed to a 4-year cycle. So one of the reasons we did that was because the recency of the data is more important, right? What happened in the early 90s, what happened in the late 90s, what happened in the early 2000s is far less important and far less informative on where we should be today than the past 10, 15 years. Like, that I think should be very clear to everybody. So if you're going to end up going with a 4-year model, if you're going to go with that 4-year, you can look at the chart here that we've got pulled up on the screen. If you could zoom in a little bit, Josh. Basically you can look at it here. You see a few spikes on the 2020 election, 2016 election, and 2012. The 2012, there's no spike. But those are the presidential elections. You can see that typically they're higher. But overall, there's really not as much of a 4-year cycle. There's not as much of an impact on Libertarian Party financials as there are for the Republicans and Democrats. That's just a historical truth. So we decided, again, we decided across the entire report to adjust for inflation. We wanted to find the set time period to apply 2020 numbers. Well, I should say 2022, 2023 numbers. So basically the year since Reno, and we wanted to apply that and look at a consistent set of data, a consistent set of years. So we went with the 2-year cycle. And again, this is a methodological choice that we made. We made that choice, and you can judge that choice. What we're trying to do is we're trying to provide an accurate look at the health of the party. And I think that this report does that. You may disagree with our methodological choices. In fact, we add an addendum at the end of this report, specifically based on that. Well, we should have compared it to the 4 years. Guess what? If you compare it to that 4-year cycle, you end up at the same conclusion that we did, that this report does. Regardless of whether you go with the 2-year cycle or the 4-year cycle, you have to come up to the same conclusion that we did in this report, is that especially the past 9 months, are basically the worst in 30 years. That it doesn't matter whether you look at it as 4-year cycles or 2-year cycles. That is the summation of this report, is that we are at 30-year lows. It doesn't get much more clear than that. Now, you can say, well, if you adjust for inflation, guess what? I'll show you a chart at the end that'll show that if we don't adjust for inflation, guess what? The past 3 months are still 30-year lows, even not adjusting for inflation.
That's great.
So regardless of what methodology you want us to use, whether you use it, please feel free. We published all the data in this report because we want this information out there. We want people to do their own analysis of it, do your own methodology on it, and come up with a report that says something different. Because basically, no matter how we crunch the numbers, no matter how you crunch the numbers, the result's still going to be the same. The party's in really bad shape. That's the bottom line of this report. And that's what we're trying to show here. And we're trying to get people involved in the Libertarian Party and say, hey, listen, if we want to turn this thing around, if we want to get some success and get some true growth in this party, it's going to take all of us to get involved and take action.
So the party's sick. And Tyler, I think you were going to jump in with some commentary. I was going to say, I think it's time for us to go line by line here, but did you have something to add before we do that?
If I can just briefly speak to that second issue of methodology that you brought up in terms of the 2-year and 4-year cycle. I think that, again, it's a case of what you choose to look at is going to be better or worse suited to looking at different aspects of the financial health of the party.
Correct.
So, and that's actually more extreme than just the conversation of 2 years or 4 years. If I wanted to have a deep dive, when I was executive director, if I wanted to do a deep look at our monthly membership, we had a heavy emphasis on growing monthly pledge membership during my tenure. And so we tracked that, I would want to track that on a 30-day cycle. Because I would want to know month to month how those monthly pledgers are growing. If I wanted to look at raw membership headcount, I think it's very clear that there are strong 4-year cyclical trends, at least going back to 2016, and it makes sense to look at the membership picture in the context of that 4-year cycle. I think those are less strong when you look at top line revenue. And I think there's every reason to believe that top line revenue should be something, because it's impacted by major giving disproportionately compared to headcount, reason to look at a 2-year instead of a 4-year cycle. There's information that can be gleaned from both. And so there's a real continuum of how you want to do this analysis. And I think the more interesting point that you touched on very quickly was the offset of the year that you've applied in this report. And now, so all of the internal reporting that the LNC is doing, and certainly that I was doing in my time at the LNC, and I suppose I should caveat, and maybe should have done this upfront 10 minutes ago, but I am not privy to any inside information. My role is purely as a past staffer with the LNC. So anything I say here is based on my personal experience and all the public data that's available. So nobody should construe anything I'm saying as a window in to how the LNC is currently operating, because that's not a window that I can provide. But I would be expecting that when they do a historical analysis and in all the reporting that's released, it's a January to December fiscal year that aligns with the calendar year. What you guys have chosen to do, and what I think is really fascinating and will be a great segue, Josh, to us going through these graphs together, is to shift that and say, let's look at the prior 12 months from today, to give us a more current look on where things are right now, not where things were December 31st, but then also to capture the full year since Reno. So effectively taking that convention revenue and expense and that convention driven disruption to the data and placing it as effectively a start point, and then looking at trends from there.
Right. And just to kind of another caveat, not all conventions were in May of every year. So there were some conventions in June. So it's kind of split between those two. So it's not going to be 100% aligned with every single convention cycle and every single post-convention success, failure, growth, strength, whatever. But it's about as accurate as we can get. And so pretty much all data in here is really on that May to April year. So essentially think about it like this: the post-Reno year applied every 2 years back. That's generally how this report will go. And one quick thing on looking at 2 versus 4-year cycles, you're right. The 4-year cycles is far more important for membership because that does include the presidential. So we do gain quite a bit more members during a presidential cycle. That does the reason why in our membership section, you'll notice that we include all that data. Yeah. So we don't try to just focus on those 2-year cycles. We actually include all of the data so that we do prevent some of that bias from coming in of that presidential election in there. So we include all of those so that everyone can see all of the data right there in front of them. But we'll get to that section. And
well, I was going to point out we're having this conversation over a photo of a graph that is year by year.
Yes. Yeah. Right. So let's dig into it, Josh, if you want to kind of start the conversation here.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you have anything you want to add, Jonathan, specifically about this chart before we move on to the others? Because there's
no, this is every May to April year for the past 30 years, adjusted for inflation, as it should be. Sue me. Tweet at me if you're mad about that. I've been tweeted about it all weekend, so you're good. But yeah, as you can see, and then this is just a 5-year rolling average, which basically just says this is the average of this year and the past 4 years. That 5-year period is what it's showing up the black line there. So you can see we're quite a bit behind on that average, the furthest behind since 2006 behind that average. So let's get into it.
Okay. Quarterly revenue versus 5-year election average. I think that's going to tell a similar story here.
Yes. So this is this is not the same 5-year average that we saw in the previous chart. This is the 5-year election average. So this is going back every 5 years, the May to April year, which basically and basically taking the average of the past 5 years, so that's 5 election years, and charting it out on the graph here. And you can see we have an average first quarter, and again, these are May to April quarters, not year quarter 1, quarter 2 of your financial fiscal year. So as you can see, we start off pretty good. We start off at average with the convention, quickly falling behind after that. And then if we scroll down to the next chart, we will see that.
Do you have any before we do that? Do we have any commentary on this little bump at the end of the year?
That is actually so we did have a max that November was the election. In November there was a max donation of 36,500 if I remember correctly. Is that the right?
And is that it looks like that in and of itself contributed.
That was a large part of it. So you can see that large donations really make an impact, and getting those max donations is extremely important for the health of the party and getting getting funds in as you would expect. So that is partially that bump.
Gotcha.
So this chart is a comparison, and this one we wanted to show that even with an election in the middle of this May to April year, we still hit rock bottom. Look, you can start in May. We start off again. These are inflation adjusted numbers. You can start off right in the middle of the pack. By August, we hit the rock bottom of the past 30 years. And people are like, well, you're comparing it to presidential years. You're comparing it to non-election years. Yes, for a reason. We're comparing it to those to show you we're not, even with an election in the middle of the year, we hit rock bottom.
Yep.
So this is 30 years of data that shows all of it up there. People also say, go ahead, Tyler.
Well, I was just going to point out that this is a very easy chart to adjust for anybody who may disagree with that methodology, because what you're talking about is you say, oh, well, presidential election years, of course, there's going to be a lot more quarterly revenue ramping up to a presidential election. Let's even presume that those are those top years on the charts. Great. Ignore those years. It's still the bottom line. Let's say, you say, this year's bad for this reason, or this year's bad for this reason, or that one shouldn't be counted because of a special circumstance. Okay, imagine those lines gone. I think of everything you've produced in the report, this is one of the more stark, I think, illustrations of the problem.
Yes.
And I think there are perhaps better charts later that we can get into that might help us diagnose the problem,
right?
And why it's occurring, and what maybe could help ameliorate that. But this was jarring to me when I first saw it.
Yes, as it should be. We are trying to draw attention to the fact that the Libertarian Party is in a bad shape. Now, people say you shouldn't have adjusted for inflation. Okay, let's take a look at this. This is that same chart without inflation adjustment.
Yeah, and
you can see the exact same thing. You see that in the blue numbers and kind of spread out all up and down the chart. You can see that in the 2000s, there's these yellow lines where this past year has gone down to those levels without adjusting for inflation. And you can see that most of the green lines are above the red line. So the 2010s were above this. So and at the very end here, you can see that we have been reduced to 90s levels, not even accounting for inflation. So this right here tells you part of the story. It doesn't tell you the real dollar where we are actually at, where the party is actually at, like the other chart does. I'm going to go to this next one here, and this shows you just the midterm. So this is the 4-year cycle, and again, you can see we're right at the bottom.
Yeah.
So this is not adjusted for inflation, so it's not as accurate as the chart we're going to go back to here. This is the actual chart. This is where the party is at in terms of real dollars. And I think it is important that we realize where the party is at, because if we don't, we're not going to have a solution to fix it. We can pretend things are okay, but if we don't actually address the issues, don't actually have a real worldview, a real grasp of where the party's at, we're not going to really be able to address it. So I wanted to kind of bring those other charts in there to show that hey, even if you look at the adjustment for inflation, or if you take out the adjustment for inflation, the numbers still look really bad.
Yeah, that's absolutely powerful. Thanks for pulling that up. Let me pull this other one here.
Yeah.
Monthly revenue versus 5-year election average. Any commentary on this one?
Yeah, I mean, you can see the effects of the convention. It was a very good convention. You can see that it was quite a bit higher than your normal. The past 5 Mays of election years has been, but it quickly falls off to July, and by July you end up at half the average.
Yeah.
And this is going to be the story throughout, that you have a really good first month, an average second month, and then by the third month, you're basically at half of fundraising of the average. There's just, no matter how you look at the data, this is what it shows.
And the same thing for November. Was that max donation that we're seeing here as well? In that
yes, November. Yes, you can see that $37,000. And again, some of these we replicate these charts that look at the midterms only at the very end. We'll glance over those. This was in the amendum based on recommendations by the Libertarian Party chair, Todd Agopian, who criticized that we looked at 2-year cycles. But if you look at the 4-year cycles, we look at the 4-year cycles with this chart. We'll do that at the end, and you'll see that the results are the same.
I think it's interesting here also that November, the actual month of the November elections, that November is on average. And you had mentioned earlier, Jonathan, that November also had was practically the only month within the identifiable data set that you're mapping here that had substantial major giving. And I suppose to explain to those who are wondering, how would one know that based on the information that is publicly available? It's because the revenue is broken out in the publicly disclosed financials into different line items for fundraising, including major gifts, chair and board solicitation, executive director solicitation, that sort of thing. So when you can see that, that there is a max contribution value in that major solicitation line, that tells you that there is major giving activity. Notably, that activity absent the rest of the months, and I think this chart more than most of the others really illustrates the difference between how you make that average in the month where that's part of your fundraising mix, and you're really missing the averages where that's missing from the fundraising mix.
And just a quick point of clarification about FEC reports. The October, November, December of election years are not exactly in line with the calendar October, November, December, right? So they're a little bit offset. The November is actually wider. I forget, sometime near the end of October to sometime might be into November into December. So that's why you see a dip in the average of October. It's because they're actually only reporting about 20 days. That's how the FEC report does it. If you want more information, the methodology and data section in this report goes over exactly what dates they should align to. It shows exactly how those reports do. So if you have more questions, that's the section you should read. But we should probably, before we get into all that, let's move on before everyone gets bored, because, man, that FEC stuff is quite
boring. Okay. So, also, monthly revenue versus the past 15 years ranked. All really powerful chart too here.
Yes.
Let's talk about that one.
Again, you can't cherry pick this data. This is all the data. We can't cherry pick it. This is all of the data. This is every single month going back in the past 15 election years. So that May to April, comparing it to every other May, to every other June, July, every other month, and where it ranks as far as how, revenue. And as you can see, the past 4 months have hit the bottom. August was also at the bottom. July was the second worst. It's not pretty. But again, this is a chart to show you this compared to all other 15 months. And we went back to 1990. That's really when the FEC, reporting stops. There's another, you can go back and look at older reports, but we didn't really find that necessary. So we kind of just stuck with it. 90 and 92 and forward.
That's worth repeating. So in the last 15 years, 5 months, 5 of the worst.
This is past 30 years of only the election years.
Oh, I got it. Okay.
So this is just the the years that had an election, either presidential or midterm.
Equating apples to apples in a sense. 5 of the worst.
And again, you can say, well, you should have only compared it to midterms. Okay, erase. You can do this yourself. We published all of the data. You can chart this out yourself and determine it for yourself, and not look at the presidential terms. And sure, you wouldn't have as many lines above the yellow line. The yellow line's still going to be at the bottom.
Yeah. 5 of the worst fundraising months in history. So, okay.
In 30 years, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, good to move on to the next one?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, this will be the membership, which, again, you'll notice that in this membership section, like I mentioned at the beginning, membership is far more reliant on the 4-year cycle. So you'll notice that we do include all of the data. We just put it all in there. Our month-to-month data only goes back for the membership, for general membership, only goes back to 2003. So that's when we were limited. We looked and asked all over the place for further back. But before then, you really only have like the December of each year. So that's why our chart, again, we start off every section by showing you all of our data in one chart. Like that was the one thing that we absolutely wanted to do, because then you can't say, oh, well, you only wanted us to look at one section. Sure, we want to zoom in and look at 2022, 23 and say, okay, how does that compare? But we wanted to show you exactly what happened. And you'll notice as we go ahead and scroll down here, you'll see, you can actually stay back on the chart. You can see right here, first half of 2022, 23, membership was pretty steady. Now notice that a lot of the financials fell off immediately within 2 months. 3 months after Reno, financials had hit pretty much bottom, because August was the worst August ever. So it starts off right off the bat, the financial numbers plummet, but the membership doesn't do this. So you can see right here, the first half of the year starts off pretty good. It's actually pretty average. It's floating right around 0% growth. But then we'll get to the beginning of 2023. things start to fall off, and we can scroll down here and start looking at it.
Before we scroll down, can I talk a bit about this? Because I think I can add some color commentary to what we're seeing throughout from the end of the 2020 election through 2021. We on staff during that time really appreciated and understood how extreme the 4-year cycle impacted our membership numbers in 2016, right? And how married to the election.
You can see it right here.
Yeah,
it's a huge bump in 2016. Jorgensen had a fantastic, from a membership perspective, whatever you think of the campaign writ large, it had a fantastic membership impact on the Libertarian Party. Our member count at the high point from Jorgensen's election day performance actually exceeded the 2016 membership count, which you also see that the bump is a little bit higher.
And it lasts longer too, which was, I was surprised by the data, how much longer.
That was our mission as we conceived it for ourselves, is to say we need to hold more of these members than the 2016 membership bump. So we need to retain more. We need to retain them for longer. We want the bump to be wider. We want the slope coming off of it to be shallower, and we want the floor that we eventually hit to be higher than the 2016 cycle. And that would represent not just membership growth against the 2016 cycle, but you can almost think, I don't want to get too mathy, right? But if you imagine the area under that curve is a very, very rough approximate of membership revenue being generated. So we knew if we could make that curve wider, if we could make that floor come up, so if we could make that drop off shallower, then that is more dues paying members continuing in that role for a longer period of time in a more substantive way that benefits the financial health of the party. And so I think you can see that there is some success in that. We always knew there was going to be a drop off after 2020. That's not surprising. But the floor did seem to come up. The one part of that plan that hasn't kicked in yet is, where do you make the turn? Right, there has to be a turn where membership starts growing again. That turn into the 2024 cycle, and the really alarming part, the acyclical part that this graph is showing, which I presume is why you have it highlighted in yellow at the end of the graph, is that additional drop off that is
right.
not really correlative to a large drop in the 2016 cycle.
Right,
that's something new. That's
right.
Not,
and our and further charts down go into this, so we'll get into that, exactly that drop. The one thing before we move on, I would actually like Tyler. A lot of people may not understand. One of the things that the CLC has been looking at is, okay, what measurements do we need to actually accurately determine the health of the party? And one thing is, this is the bylaw sustaining membership. And many people may not understand what that means, and understand that number isn't really truly indicative of just this month, what happens this month, because it can actually reflect what's happened a year ago. So if you could kind of explain what this number actually measures, I think that'd be really helpful for people going forward. What does this mean? What does a member actually mean? Because it's a little bit more complicated based on the way it's reported by LP National.
Right. So, this may be a stealth candidate for the most controversial thing I say on this podcast, but membership headcount is a really bad KPI.
Yeah. But it's the only one we have in this area.
I don't know that that's true, but it is certainly something that we have the most historical data on, because it's the top line of the membership report that the party has been publicly reporting for a very long time. But it is at the end of the, let me explain the reason I say that. The reason I say that is not because I don't care about or value our members. It's because it is an extreme lagging indicator of financial health. So you have different types of memberships that people have. You certainly have our monthly recurring members, and you get pretty, you can track their cancellations and their revenue and get pretty timely. If somebody calls up and says, I want to stop my monthly membership, that's going to be reflected in a revenue way right away. They don't drop off of headcount for another 12 months. So they remain a bylaw sustaining member for up to a year. So if you're using that top line, just membership headcount number to track how many people are still in the party, or is the party growing, or is it shrinking, or what direction is it moving in, you're getting an extreme lag to a lot of that data. From the moment that your customer has made a values-based decision to you seeing it reflected in a data point, that's one of the last data points to respond to that decision.
Understood.
So for me, revenue was always more centered when I looked at analysis, and membership headcount was important. And I just laid out some of our goals and vision as staff in terms of how we were trying to, as these graphs were being generated, how we were trying to move them in a direction we thought would be more beneficial to the party. But there's always an extreme lag in terms of actually reflecting your member decisioning in the business data that you're getting back on that raw headcount number.
That's an excellent explanation. I think that one of the things that CLC is working on is trying to figure out, okay, what metrics do we want to propose that the Libertarian Party should be reporting on that are more reflective of month-to-month membership changes, right? So that, bylaw sustaining members kind of has to be a defined thing, right? That is defined in our bylaws, but we can have other measurements that the Libertarian Party reports on that actually gives an accurate month-to-month, okay, we're losing members, we're losing this many members, we're gaining this many members, and shows us a real true sense of who's joining the party and who's leaving the party. Because the bylaw sustaining membership is very rough and delay, like you said, it's delayed up to a year measurement of that. So that is something that we, at the CLC, hopefully by the end of the year, before the next convention cycle, we can start putting out there and say, here's some ideas, here's some ways we can actually really truly measure health of the party in terms of membership that isn't delayed, doesn't have these issues, as just a way to really get a sense of the health of the party. So
let's keep moving.
Let's do it.
Monthly growth, April
Yeah.
election year. Can you explain to the viewers why it starts at the same point here? How that works?
So this is basically a month before convention. Shows the growth of the convention in May, then tracks it from there. So everything is based off of where everything is from the month prior to the Reno convention. So you've essentially, and you can see this is every year that we have data going back. Every year that we have monthly data of membership data, which goes back to 2003. And here we show again to every 2-year cycle. And again, if you don't like that it's not 4-year cycle, guess what? It is here. You can just take out the ones you don't like and compare it to that. Fine. Still shows that the only year that was worse than this in terms of membership growth was 2014. So you can take that for what you want. 2014 was a really rough year.
Yeah.
You go back up to the other chart above it, you can kind of see where 2014. You can see the dip in 2014 before the Gary Johnson campaign. Clearly, he made a huge difference, regardless of whether you liked him or Bill Weld. They made a huge difference in terms of getting the party back on track, reinvigorated life. I hope that we can see the same thing in 24, where we have a good candidate come out and really inspire membership to come on. But these numbers really kind of tell the opposite story about what's going to be happening over the next year and a half into the 24 election.
And Jonathan, since you mentioned that big dip, I'm going to be a chart integrity purist here. And,
okay.
And this is not an attempt to dunk on you guys, but I'm going to point it out for the viewership because the numbers are pretty small on the screen. Your bottom axis occurs at the 10,000 member level.
Right.
So
right.
Some of these big dips,
very clear,
like the party almost disappeared. That is not an axis that is true to
right.
zero.
Yes.
It's a lot. Yes. Let's be very, yes. We are not trying to hide it there.
That's true both for the effects that you're seeing highlighted in yellow are going to look larger in terms of total percentage movement. And some of those dips earlier in the chart are going to look like larger total percentage movement because it is a cropped chart effectively. And so
exactly.
Anybody who couldn't read the numbers along that left side of the chart, I wanted to make that clear.
That's a good clarification. That's
good reminder.
So,
anything on this one before we move to the next one?
Go to the next chart because this will actually, as you can see, it's averaged through most of last year until the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
And so we can see the chart on the right here really starts to look at, okay, what's going on? Every odd year here, beginning of every odd year is charted out here in terms of growth, month-to-month growth. And as we can see, this year's growth, 2023 growth, goes way below what we've normally seen this time in the election cycle of any election cycle that we have data again. It goes back to somewhere in 2003. So again, that's what we're trying to show here. We're trying to show, wait a second, there's a weird drop here. Let's figure out what's going on. There's something here that isn't right, that is different. And that's the point doing data analysis is to figure out, okay, what looks different? Why does it look different?
Right.
So I think that's what this chart shows. Membership was actually pretty good for a midterms. But again, we're seeing this drop right at the very end here. The chart on the left here kind of shows month-to-month 10-year average of election years. And again, you can see it's a concerning drop at the beginning of 2023. It started really in December of 2022, but it's something to pay attention to and reflects, I think, kind of the summation of our summary of the report is that there are some things here that are concerning, and we need to figure out ways to kind of turn the party around. So,
okay. Any other commentary on these two before we move forward to the next one?
I think we're good with these two.
Okay. Total lifetime memberships.
Yeah, it felt wrong to not mention this. This was actually so this is charted out over. This is all the data we have, month-to-month data we have on lifetime membership. That goes back to about 2007. Before then, we don't have month-to-month. Just the way it was reported back then. Again, I'd love if somebody could pull out this data and send it to us. That would be amazing. You can kind of see, again, 2014, even though we've mentioned how bad 2014 was in terms of overall membership, was actually really good, had a really good bump for lifetime membership. You can also see 2016 had a nice bump. The drop in the January in 2018 was a data correction.
Oh, that's right.
So they corrected some data. So that loss shouldn't all have happened on 1 month. It should have been happening over the years, but the data just hadn't been updated.
Okay.
So in other words, somebody passed away, somebody left the membership, and it just wasn't reflected in the overall numbers.
It looks like there was a similar downward trend coming on.
Yes. So again, you can see the Reno convention bump right there, right where your cursor is. So you had a really good bump there. I think it was the most total overall of any year. Nice. But we can scroll down here and we can actually see the percentage growth, which I think is an interesting chart. It was actually for a midterms. You can see it was one of the best midterms. Doesn't quite beat out the presidential years in terms of percentage growth, but it does in fact. It is in fact the best that we have record of as far as midterms. And again, shows you kind of where we're at. That was actually a very good year for lifetime membership. But just like the membership data, the overall membership data, we start to see a concerning trend at the beginning of 23. So if you scroll down one, we can kind of take a look at this. Now I have, you can see here, we compare every single year. This is all the data we have on lifetime membership. So the first 4 months of every single year going back to as much data as we have. And you can see that 2023 is at the end there with zero growth in lifetime membership. And that's just unheard of. We just have never seen that before. The minimum before then was 9, as you can see in 2015. But again, this is a really concerning trend that we saw along with membership trends, with trending down after the beginning of the year, where we saw that 12%, I think it was 12% decline in membership in the past 4 months. Well, in lifetime membership, it's been completely flat. Now, for those who don't understand, lifetime membership is you pay the lifetime membership fee, you become a lifetime member for life. So the only way you can cancel that is either you die or you call in to cancel. So what we're seeing here, we only LP National would have the numbers of how many people have called in and canceled. Several people have reached out to me to tell me that's what they have done. So I know that there is a cancellation. There are people canceling their lifetime memberships this year.
Just take a minute.
So essentially, what this tells us is that as many people are canceling as are joining, and that is concerning.
So it's really important, I think, to put a point on what you've explained, because lifetime membership is one of those things that makes membership data awkward and clunky to work with in the LP, because we have all of these different member types, and these are as our bylaws as a party defined, these are members of the party. They have attained that lifetime membership. If it has been obtained recently, it is at the level of giving $1,500. There were times in the past where that was as low as $1,000. I don't know the exact year. It was before my time that increase occurred. But at any rate, once you pay that once, many of these people continue to be donors to the party. Many of them also do not. But regardless of that membership status remains active once they've attained that lifetime member level, unless, Jonathan, as you said, unless they become deceased or actively call in and cancel. And I can tell you how incredibly rare it is to have libertarians
I know
actively call in and cancel their membership.
Yeah.
And then the only other thing that I can throw into the mix there, as you mentioned in the chart above this one, is some sort of data correction. And
right.
so
And
that
the LP National hasn't
Yeah.
announced any sort of data correction as of yet. They've had some issues with member numbers, but they haven't actually said, okay, we've corrected some data on this. That, combined with my knowledge of multiple people who have canceled, who have called in and said we're canceling our membership to national.
Right. So I just want to recognize the full possibility space of what could occur. It's worth noting that unless that correction is something that is affecting, dozens of records, you would expect that to maybe make the data inaccurate, but to drop it to or below zero is something that really merits looking into and implies that there is not a strong headwind of new lifetime members.
There has never, let me put it this way. There's never been I went back and looked, there's never been a 4-month stretch where the membership growth, the lifetime membership growth has been zero.
Yeah.
Ever. No 4-month period has there ever been a zero growth.
And that includes that large correction you pointed out earlier?
No, not that one correction. They went down by 50 members. So that was a major correction.
That would be a big enough bump where if something like that were happening, it would look like this in the data. Other than that, it's a lack of new members coming on at that level.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is an interesting section because it really kind of compares financials and memberships and says, okay, how much are people, each individual member, giving? What's the average over it? Again, I wish we could I wish we had more information on this. I wish we could look at exactly how much members were giving, and we could really dive into this. We're just having to look at raw numbers, rough numbers, public numbers. But what it shows is that you've basically got the white number there. It shows revenue per member, and that is per month. The yellow line is a 6-month rolling average. And again, this goes back to 2003 because that's when our monthly membership data starts. And what we see here is we had a fairly average beginning to the year, and you can see right after Reno that 6-month monthly average donation per member. So that's basically overall revenue divided by the number of members, and you can see right here that it drops to levels we've just never seen before. If you scroll down a little bit, you can see the exact numbers. You've got basically, prior to this, in the past 20 years, we'd never dipped below $8.33 per member, that 6-month rolling average. And we are now basically at $6.38. So that's almost a 25% reduction in the amount of revenue divided by members. So that is a very concerning stat. Ironically, the only reason we have a bump at the very, very tail end of that 6-month average, the only reason we have a bump there is because membership also dropped way down and financials went up, even though they were still the worst. It was still the worst April in the past 30 years. The membership numbers did come down. So it's still, I don't see this number changing very quickly. This is going to be, again, this is a rough estimation of really what's going on financially with each member per month, but it does give us a picture that it kind of combines the pictures of membership and combines the picture of financials that have been painted by the data. So we can keep scrolling.
This is probably one of the most impacted charts in your report by your methodological decision to inflation adjust your numbers.
Right.
I think it's very important to know what this is saying because of that decision and what this isn't. And what this is describing is the average purchasing power that our members are contributing to the party per member. And that is something that's going to be distinct and different than if you tracked it in nominal dollars going back to 2024 against fundraising performance. So it's just important to understand that that's what it's describing. And it's not necessarily describing, the value package that they're purchasing or the tier that they're opting to bucket into, or whether we have more premium members versus basic members versus bronze members, like whether the membership mix is changing. You're not really capturing that here because of the inflation adjustment in a way that's coherent. What you are capturing in a way that's coherent is the amount of their own purchasing power our members on average are donating to the party, and conversely, the amount of purchasing power that then confers upon the party to apply towards projects and programs on a per member basis.
Good qualifier.
Sounds good.
Yep. Okay. As we get into the Fast 5 election year averages here, Jonathan, talk through this one here.
Yeah. So basically, again, this is a chart that shows, okay, here's the 5-year average. Here's how far below we've ended up. So this is the past 5 election years. So again, the 2-year cycle. And again, you can see the effects of the convention. And then quickly by July, we're at 0. We're at average. And then we quickly fall off to somewhere near $600,000 behind what an average election year would have been. It's pretty self-explanatory. We fall pretty quickly behind on that.
And I'm sure that's trend's going to escalate. You have the same thing for membership.
Same thing for members. This one is going to be less accurate because it does compare presidential cycles. And as we said, the membership cycles do work more on the 4-year cycle. But this still shows that we are down about 15% compared to past 5 election years. So again, we decided to stick with one set of the 2-year cycle over the past 10 years, and we've applied that across everything. So that's what this chart describes.
Got it. Any other commentary on this before we move on?
I think we're good. I think we're going to hit the ballot access report. So just as a quick caveat, I wish I had mentioned in here that there are several inaccuracies in this report. We didn't really want to spend a whole lot of time on it. We've actually got a lot of CLC members on the ballot access committee, but they wanted to be very careful about not revealing any private information for understandable reasons. You don't want to let Republicans and Democrats know what you're trying to do because obviously they're going to try to stop you. I think the main takeaway here from this section really is that state governments are trying to screw us. That's the main caveat. That's the main issue that the Libertarian Party is facing, especially in New York. They're having major problems. Illinois, they're having pretty much across the board. There are going to be ballot access issues. It's going to be a forever problem with until we start changing the laws. It's going to be a forever problem. So we don't think that the Libertarian Party is responsible for those events. However, there are problems that this LNC caused, exacerbated, however you want to put it, whether it's the disaffiliation of New Mexico, the split in Michigan, the problems in New Hampshire, Massachusetts. Those are issues that could have been solved. Or at least some of them could have been solved by getting to the table and saying, hey, let's work together. Let's figure out a solution and a path forward. I do hold leadership responsible for coming in and saying, screw you, it's our way or the highway.
Well, I mean, I think
to take the highway.
A lot of people are very frustrated with the decision for the LNC to basically sue state affiliates. Michigan's an example.
Yes, and we get into that in our recommendation section. Yeah. I think that decision is going to have a lot of a really bad impact on the party's financials because nobody wants to donate to a party that's suing other libertarians.
Absolutely.
That's just
sidestepping that and kind of refocusing on ballot access directly, though. I think the relevant transition here, or the relevant impact going from the financial data to this ballot access picture, is that it maybe nobody's fault, or Democrats and Republicans' fault, if we want to put the blame correctly, for ballot access laws getting more restrictive and more difficult for us to work with. Our ability to combat that, whether it's legally or legislatively, or to comply with it to attain 50 state ballot access against a higher threshold, or all of the above, are all proportional to the amount of resources that the party can mobilize in those fights. And most ballot access drives are, coordinated efforts in terms of the major drives that have really high thresholds where states struggle to do them on their own as affiliates, are collaborations between affiliates and national, and they're very resource intensive at national. Resources in this case is you just translate it directly to money. This is sadly the ballot access problems are problems that it takes cash to solve.
Yeah, I mean, $5 a signature, $4 to $5 a signature is what you're paying petitioners. So
I mean that's friendly petitioners who are giving us in the current petitioning environment. It's a lot more expensive than that when we have to hire.
In New York, it goes way up from that
market rate. New York it tends to be very expensive. Again, I share the reticence to talk about strategy or detailed specifics, but I think it is relevant to understand that those who care about 50 state ballot access should care about the financial health of the party, because those two things are going to be directly correlated going into 2024.
Yes, and if we're I hate to go back to this, but adjusting for inflation tells us how well we are able to fight these battles compared to past years.
There is absolutely been inflation in terms of the cost of petitioning. And in fact, that cost has probably outpaced inflation.
I'm sure it has.
You have the rate of inflation hitting labor costs, while you have the artificial sort of inflation created by
the demand
thresholds requiring more signatures, requiring more petitioning, legislators, legislating increased cost that we then have to bear in order to attain ballot access in those states. So ballot access has become a lot more expensive, making it that much more important that we mobilize dollars in that fight.
So ignoring the challenges, or actually say ignoring the dissension, the Michigans and the New Mexicos, and just looking at states like New York and states like Illinois, where we're facing a really large uphill battle, it does look like the trend line right now towards 2024 is not a 50 state ballot access situation.
I really doubt that we will have. I mean, it's going to be. It would take a miracle,
right?
Frankly.
Not to be defeatist by any means, but looking at the trend line right now, it does look like it's moving in that direction. How long has it been since we haven't had that, Tyler? Do you have any of that context? Because it's like I know in 2020 and 2016 we had the 50 state access, right? In 2012 was it a similar picture? Do you have any data before that?
I believe the intelligent thing is to say that I don't know. I do believe that it fell slightly short in 2012, but this predates my direct experience with the party. I'm now trying to recall facts rather than experience.
Just wasn't sure if you had that off the top of your head.
I mean, it is not something that is one of these things that has, never happened, in the last 30 years. There have been cycles with less than 50 state ballot access. I can tell you it is incredibly legitimizing when we have it. And you do see performance impacted when we have it versus when we don't.
I mean, just simply from a narrative perspective, for a presidential candidate to be able to say, I'm on the ballot in all 50 states or not, I mean, again, that's huge. So that's a very good point to make.
It speaks to seriousness for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've reached the end of the charts, right? Jonathan, do you have anything you look on the
let's kind of go to our conclusion. I recommend we'll have a link to the description. Please read through these conclusions. I think that these conclusions really speak to what we can look at as far as why these numbers are the way that they are. Why revenue is set back 30 years. Yeah. And frankly, it's because you have a leadership that came in and said, our way or the highway, and people chose the highway. I think that it's clear that a lot of Libertarian Party members are quiet quitting the party. They're just like hands off. They're either donating the minimum or they're just waiting to see what happens. And frankly, that needs to change. We need to get people involved in the party. Let's scroll down to the recommendation section. I do kind of want to touch on a few of those. I think some people had some questions about these. The first one is pretty simple. The LNC needs to look at why people are leaving, and actually not just look at why they're leaving, act on why they're leaving. Figure out why they're leaving and figure out how to stop it. And so take a hard look at what's actually going on. That's going to be really important. You know what? Before we actually get into the recommendations, there were two things I wanted to address. First, and I'd forgotten about it after the end of the charts. Two things I wanted to address. One was the why we didn't have a section on here about economics, about whether that explains some of these issues, and two, why we didn't look at the CRM issues for whether or not it caused these decline in numbers. The first one's easy as far as economics goes. Here, let me actually add this. This is total raised by all party committees by the FEC. The FEC reported data by all party committees in May to April years. And you can see right here, there is no major decline over the past year in donations to political parties. And even if you look at this on a month-to-month basis, it shows the same picture. There's actually an increase over previous years, whereas the Libertarian Party has decreased by something like more than 50% in months. the data is pretty consistent. The donations to party committees are at exactly the same level. So if we saw an economy-wide downturn in donations to political parties, it would show up right here, and it doesn't.
Right.
It shows that it's flatlined if you adjust for inflation. Yes, I adjust for inflation again. But you can see that it's flatlined over the past 4 or 5 years. Obviously, you can see the presidential spikes. You can see how much more presidential to Republicans and Democrats, how much more revenue they get over the presidential cycles. Compared to that, to the chart of the Libertarian Party donations, it doesn't really have nearly this large of an impact every 4 years. But you can see that it's basically even across 4 years adjusted for inflation. So there is no evidence to suggest that there's an economic downturn that's responsible for the party being at 30-year lows for fundraising. So that was one thing I wanted to address. The other thing was the CRM issues that they've been having, that they've kind of pointed to. Again, these financial numbers dropped 2 months after Reno, 3 months after Reno. They were immediate. They were quick. They started right off the bat. We had a section about the economy and ended up removing. We also had a section about the CRM and ended up removing it. Part of the problem is we wanted this report to stick to publicly available information. We didn't want to go outside of that and stick to it. Also, we didn't want to go after staff. This is not a staff issue. This is not because some staff made some choices. You don't have a 50% decline in revenue because a few emails aren't being sent. That's just reality.
Absolutely.
People are either excited to give to you, excited to join, or they're not. And we aren't seeing any excitement to donate or to join. So you can kind of take that both ways. At some point, I hope that the LNC issues a report on exactly how the CRM implementation went, what the effects of it were. But at this point, I don't see it having as major an impact as some people seem to think. There was some impact, but I can't imagine it being accountable for more than a few or 3% of change in revenue.
Jonathan, before you get too deep in,
Yeah.
and I get too biased by your recommendations, I think it might be a good time for me to jump in and
Go for it.
share some of my conclusions from looking
Go for
at it. So, one way to approach data is to try to walk in kind of tabula rasa and say, what are these numbers telling me? But another thing that can be very, very helpful is to sort of hypothesis tests some known theories about what's going on. And so
Sorry, I clicked the wrong one. My bad.
I felt very dizzy all of a sudden.
Yeah, sorry. Go for it.
But it's to hypothesis test some theories that are going on and some of the big narratives. And you spoke to the economic overarching narrative, the idea that this is reflective of larger macroeconomic conditions beyond the LNC's control. I don't think that seems to explain, for the reasons that you covered, all of the trends we're seeing, and certainly compared to prior years that had similar economic conditions that were not ideal, you still see underperformance, particularly in the last 4 months. Conversely, I think there is a narrative that you have Mises Caucus come in at Reno, and like all of the decent people left the party after Reno and took their money with them, and it's been hit from there. And I have to say, I don't think that's consistent with the data either. What I don't see a massive exodus happening after Reno. In fact, we see a very good Reno in terms of financial performance of that convention. You do see a drop in the month or two that follow it. That effect, that lots of revenue coming in and then some petering off, can be kind of a lumpy bucketing issue with the sort of the froth, the rapids of some members leaving, but new members also joining and replacing them, and ultimately doesn't fall deeply off of that trend line until after November, until essentially the start of this year. 2023 is where we see the really alarming numbers that, for me, if I was executive director, would be existential challenges. We're talking months that have $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 of revenue on the month. The modern Libertarian Party as I knew it and operated within it, could not survive long on that revenue. And to the extent that the cash position of the party currently can improve in that revenue environment is indicative of the fact that it's just not spending, that it's not running the projects, that it's not going out and doing trainings, that it doesn't have teams hitting doors in the field, that it's not doing the candidate support, it's not doing the because of quirks of the calendar, it's not doing the ballot access work. I don't imply that they're in any way derelict in a ballot access push they should be part of, but they're not doing big ballot access spending. Nothing's going out the door, and they're not building the strength for when they're going to need it to operate at anything like the level the party has operated in past years. So that to me implies not a post-Reno exodus. That implies looking at the course that the LNC has chosen and members and donors staying with them at, maybe slightly below some of those averages that you've laid there. But when you include the strong convention revenue, when you include a decent November, you have some low months in between, but that kind of, call it a low average. But then where you see the real alarming trend is once people have had a chance to actually process some of the activity of that committee. And so you look at things like Rage Against the War happening in, I believe, January, happening over the winter. You look at the lawsuits in Michigan that I know have been, anecdotally a reason that a lot of people have cited to me for changing their view of supporting the national party and shifting support to candidates and state affiliates and other avenues of giving. You see these unforced errors that I know we don't need to go into in elaborate detail, but it's people processing the actual activities of this committee and making a value judgment on the basis of that. I don't see the data reinforcing this idea that there was either an active, aggressive post-Reno purge or that there was an active, aggressive post-Reno knee-jerk withdrawal of support. What you see is a real alarming trend that we're right now in the middle of. That's not a post-Reno trend from almost a year ago, but that's a right now 2023 is projecting if the numbers don't change. And I don't believe your report included April, but for those who are watching this by the time that it hits April, numbers.
We had the April FEC report. We did have that one in there.
Report. Okay, the April detailed financials are now out from the LNC, and have another sub 100,000 revenue month. And
so the lowest month on April on record.
And, not the lowest month on record because it's higher than the last couple of months, which is good. It's positive directionally, but again, just so far below the threshold of where the party needs to be that it ought to be alarming for anybody that expects the National Committee to be performing the kind of things that it has performed in modern times, in past cycles and in past years. It's below its sustainable revenue level.
And money in the bank is also another thing that we've heard narrative-wise when we put this report out. Is the LP or the LNC has more money in the bank, and I think you touched on the reason why if you're doing less.
Right. Well, staff is at almost at 50% of what it was before Reno. So you're doing less. Of course, you're going to have money in the bank. The reason why people give to a political party is not so that money can sit in a bank; it's to do things.
Absolutely.
And this LNC is not doing things.
There's an amazing term in finance that I've always loved that I do not believe is strictly applicable here, but there's a corollary that may be applicable here. It's called a dead cat bounce. The idea is that if you drop a dead cat from high enough, it'll bounce after it hits the ground. And when a business in the for-profit sector, and it's worth noting that the LNC is not a for-profit business, but a business in the for-profit sector. Right before bankruptcy, sometimes you'll see the cash position improve dramatically. And that's because they've cut loose staff, they've stopped producing product, they've stopped paying vendors, but there's still money coming in the door for a little while. As you draw down operations, you can see a cash bounce, right? Now, the LNC is not a bankrupt organization. And you shouldn't, I had to deal with this when I was executive director. Every financial downturn in the party's health is the party is bankrupt, the party is broke, the party hasn't. Strictly not true, right? But what is true is if you cut half of your staff costs, if you stop doing field work, if you don't have a political team anymore, if you're not doing ballot access work, if you're not doing trainings, if you're not working with candidates to provide that candidate support, if you've wound down all of those functional operations and you still have some donor base contributing, even if it's far less than was contributing when you had projects to sell them on, you can see that cash position improve. The challenge, as we talked about earlier, is that there will have to be ballot access work. There will ideally have to be candidate support work. There is a point at which the party wants to have an impact and needs to mobilize money to do that. And if you don't have revenue coming in that can support that, then you're going to be relying almost solely on that reserve. And that obviously then disappears very quickly. And so that's not the position you want to see the party in. I'm happy to see it in a strong cash position, but you need revenue to operate. Cash pays a bill once, right? Revenue pays it ongoing.
Yeah,
and that's where it needs to be.
No, that's excellent. An excellent point.
Okay, so you want to jump into recommendations?
Let's do it. Okay. Yeah, I wanted to make sure I hit on a few of those things beforehand. Yeah, like I said before, kind of skimmed over it a little bit, but yes, listen to members, figure out exactly what is going on with why members are leaving at the rate that they are.
I think
especially lifetime members. Lifetime members are people who have put in at least $1,500 if they've done it recently. Right. They're clearly going to be the people you call when you need to fundraise. Why are they leaving? These are the first people you call when you say, "Hey, we've got a ballot access need. We've got a legal need. We've got a need for money. Can you help us out?" And they're leaving. And so you got to figure out what's going on. What are the reasons for it? Recommendation 2, addressing internal challenges. Again, we're going to rely on publicly available information here, but it's been a massive turnover since Reno, which is understandable. But the fact that there is still a lot of rumors about a bad working culture, about not having the right tools or micromanagement by the LNC. These are all things that have kind of been swirling around there. You want to have an environment that's positive to work in. And I think focusing on that and making sure that that's the case. These accusations of sabotage and what have you, that's got to stop. That creates such a toxic work environment. It's truly unacceptable. Leaders should never, ever do that publicly without proof. Like, yes, if you have proof of sabotage, put it out there, show it to everybody. Don't create this environment where all your staff are looking at it going, "Are you the saboteur? Are you the saboteur?" Right. That's disgusting behavior and absolutely just has to stop, period. Like, there's no acceptable place for it.
What I want to emphasize for your audience on this podcast too, that applies to past staff. That also applies to current staff, right? The staffers that are working now very hard for the party are doing the best they can in the framework and direction that the LNC has led them. A lot of people want staffers to have a lot more influence and control than they do. Even high-level staffers have directives that they have to follow. And it's worth noting how wildly inappropriate it would be for a high-level staffer to be out there publicly breaking with the leadership that employs them. So it's it's something I would discourage. No matter what the condition is, look to those who are actually representing the party, who are setting the tone for the party, who are setting the direction for the party. If you think the party is moving in the wrong direction, weaponizing that and turning it against staff, certainly if you're in a leadership role, is wildly unprofessional and I think disqualifying. But even if you are just a rank and file member, be better. It's not staff's to be out there being your voice on these issues. If you think that the committee's going in the wrong direction, you can provide that feedback to the committee. And if the committee's not responsive, you can direct consternation towards them. But that shouldn't be something that staff has to contend.
Right. And to be very, very clear, this is not an attempt to point finger at staff. I do not think
I'm not suggesting that you.
I know you aren't. I just want to be very clear that everyone knows that I am. This is not a staffing issue, folks. This is not the environment that is created at National is not the staff's creation. They are the pressure from above is what's going to cause that environment. Moving on to recommendation number 3, revitalizing major donor relationships. We saw what that bump did in November, where that one single donation made the difference and brought it up to average. We need to be actively out there. The LNC needs to be actively out there developing these relationships. They are finally recreating a fundraising committee, which we had in the past prior to Reno, but then it took a year before it to start up again. And we've had 9 months of the worst fundraising in 30 years to do it. Why did it take so long for this committee to get started is what I want to know. I guess we're looking at the past, and I don't want to sit here and point fingers, but that's a big question mark about why it took this long to get this committee restarted, because that seems like the obvious place to start. We've had a fundraising committee in the past. It was effective. We could see the results of their work. Why over the past year we haven't? That's pretty shocking to me. So, recommendation 4, refocus messaging. Again, the point of messaging is, does it appeal to donors? Does it appeal to members? Does it appeal to voters? Does it appeal to candidates? And we're not seeing any of those things. So yes, is it nice that Twitter account has got a few more followers? It gets a few more likes. Great. But what does it really matter? It really matters what the real world impact of a messaging is. It matters whether you're getting voters, you're getting donors, you're getting members, and you're getting candidates. If you have messaging that drives away good candidates, guess what? You're not getting all the voters that they would have brought in. And so if your messaging is actively discouraging good candidates, you're hurting top to bottom. You're hurting your membership, your donors, your voters. So I think that the focus of messaging really should be to impact and have real world results. Seems pretty straightforward to me. Recommendation 5, restoring customized candidate. This is one we've kind of touched on a little bit before about stopping some of the training and going to the Leadership Institute. The Leadership Institute does a good job for what they do, but they don't really provide. And Tyler, I'd be interested in kind of your opinion on this. They don't really provide the same level of intimate training that has been provided in the past, that really kind of can handhold a libertarian candidate and say, here's what your goals need to be. Here's what you can look to accomplish. What would be you're obviously not all libertarian candidates are running to win, say. So what can you do that would be a win, that does move the party forward, that does move the libertarian message forward? And that's something that they're not going to get from the Leadership Institute.
Yeah, well, Jonathan and Josh, I actually, as a young activist many moons ago, went through LI training. So I've done like their 2-day training course intensive, and they're very good at what they do. And there are tremendous skills that can be picked up from an LI training. Those are going to be what I'm going to think of as like the brass tacks politics, like activism 101. How do I table effectively? Right? How do I want to hit a door? How am I effective, as I'm talking to people on a quad with a clipboard in my hand? Those sort of very basic, here's how to be an effective activist. LI certainly had, and I imagine still has, some very good targeted, like as good as what we would provide material on those subjects. Here's what LI is not going to do. LI is not going to talk to libertarian candidates about how to be libertarian candidates in this space. And there are really unique challenges that our candidates confront. How do you make good strategic campaign decisions based on how do you figure your win number in the sort of races that our libertarian candidates oftentimes find themselves in? One of the most conventional races we find ourselves in would be a 3-way race where we're challenging a Democrat and a Republican. We have tons of candidates who run locally, and both this committee and the last committee had particular focus on local candidates in a way that outside organizations are not necessarily going to. But a lot of these candidates will run locally in a 7-way pick 3, and how to calculate your win numbers, identify your persuadable universe, how to do all those things in the environment that our candidates confront. LI is not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. And so the advanced way that and of course, they're not going to tell our libertarian activists how to build our libertarian infrastructure either, which it presents a different set of challenges for our affiliates and our affiliate leaders. And so I don't want to give them short shrift to focus on candidates alone. But so there's value there, but it's different than the value that libertarians can provide when we train internally, which is why we felt there was value to do internal trainings. And this is my own personal disclosure of bias, because we obviously did run a very vigorous internal training during my tenure as executive director, spearheaded by the very talented Kara Schultz, and with a ton of staff buy-in and a ton of buy-in from other experts outside of staff to make that a really strong delivered training across the regions and at the national convention. So if you think I am biased, I probably am, because I thought there was tremendous value there. But that value, I think, is in the difference between what we offer our libertarian candidates specifically and our libertarian activists specifically, and what a generic activist training would offer a generic activist.
Well, and I feel like in the long run too, it's probably more cost effective to have those capabilities inside the organization rather than having to rely on a contractor to scale that up or down. I mean, it's a disappointing fact for me looking at an 80% turnover, because my assumption is at this point that a lot of that capacity has been lost.
Well, it ties into the earlier conversation about major giving, right? The trainings were able to be delivered to 8 regions because of a portion of that support came from small dollar enthusiastic giving from libertarian members across those regions who wanted to see training delivered to them. It also had very generous major donor support, because it's something we could go talk to people who could mobilize significant resources,
value add,
present the value of the program, and get them to contribute to delivering that value as a very concrete, fundable deliverable. And so it had an element of being able for us to demonstrate value so that we can generate revenue. And at the end of the day, those trainings were revenue positive, certainly revenue neutral at the very least. It was not a cost center for the party to deliver those regional trainings. It was something that generated enough support to cover itself.
Right. Think about it like this. If I'm calling up a donor, I'm saying, hey, I would like you to donate to us so we could send a candidate to training. Or are you saying, hey, I need you to donate to us so we can provide training?
Right.
That's the difference here. And that's what you need to, that's what the LNC needs to understand, is that when they're saying we're outsourcing it, well, why don't we just give to the candidate? The candidate can go buy their own training on their own. Or so the value add of saying we provide our own training, our own customized fundamental training to candidates is a value add that donors are looking for. So yeah, recommendation 6, stop suing other libertarians. This is pretty simple. Whether it's the lawsuit in Michigan or it's the lawsuit in North Carolina or Virginia, I forget which one it is. They're suing some state in there.
Virginia.
I think it's Virginia. Yeah. Or New Mexico over the trademark. Regardless of what it is, this isn't the way forward. There are a lot of people that are not going to donate to the Libertarian Party as long as they have lawsuits against other libertarians. There are other ways
we literally have former members, or maybe even in some cases current members, giving to a fund that is going to be the opposite case against the LNC. So I mean, that's absolutely crazy.
Exactly. So it's a double loss. Not only are you having to spend money, well, it's triple loss. You're spending money to pay for a lawyer. You are losing donations because people are turning that against you. You are sending donations to the organization that is paying for their own lawyer against you. So it's a lose-lose-lose. And I understand that these are tricky situations. I understand that bylaws in there. Get to the negotiating table, get to the mediation table, figure this out, be adults.
And merits notwithstanding, relevant to the financial situation alone,
right?
The party is in a position right now where it has depleted its legal fund. FEC makes a distinction between a legal fund where giving to that fund does not count towards the Fed funds cap for individual contributions within a calendar year. That fund at points was very well funded. Again, as a result of targeted giving and cultivating relationships and selling value, focusing on major gift, that's gone. What that means is, go forward, any cost of legal action is really going to be primarily funded with general fund dollars, which are the same dollars that need to be able to be mobilized to pay staff, to provide training, to do ballot access work, to keep the lights on. All of those costs now associated with that are at a point where they're pretty much coming out of general funds. I don't want to be inaccurate. I believe it was somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000 on the April financial statement that was in the legal fund, which is certainly far less than what's been authorized for just the legal action that's been authorized so far.
So they're taking
general
funds.
that is not a sideshow to the financial picture. That's a direct expense that's going to be now pulling out of general funds to cover it.
Got it. That is good to know and frankly disturbing. Right, fewer secret meetings. This is, again, we've heard a lot of reports about just how many secret meetings have been happening and rumors of its misuse. If you want to regain the trust of membership, they just more openness needs to be had and be more careful about what these meetings are being used for and what's about being talked about them. I think for the Dallas Accord 2.0, read this section, guys. I think maybe what we need to do is maybe we need to have somebody from people from different caucuses come in and we discuss this section and see if this is something that we can work towards, because this is a plan that actually, and I haven't seen anybody else offer a tangible, real world, actionable plan that says, hey, here's a way we can make it so that all libertarians can work together in the Libertarian Party. I haven't seen anybody else make this suggestion. We're throwing it out there. We're putting down the gauntlet to say, okay, let's figure out a solution. Let's figure out a path forward that we can get past this partisan bickering and actually get to work together. But I think we'll leave this one for maybe a podcast on its own with a bunch of people from a bunch of different caucuses and parts of the Libertarian Party. I think that'd be pretty fascinating. So let's get down to the final section, which I believe is what we can do. And first is join the Libertarian Party, donate to the Libertarian Party. Ultimately, that's what's going to get the party out of its current slump. That's what's going to need to take. We aren't going to turn the party around by sitting around and not doing something. We're going to have to get involved. So I encourage people, keep your membership active, get involved, figure out how to become a delegate. Contact us at the CLC. We are organizing all over the place. We've got a great team that's working on these things. And then we're going to be putting forward a lot of solutions, a lot of actionable items that we can actually put in place to make the party more professional, make the party successful, and ultimately figure out a path that we can actually grow the Libertarian Party. Because what's going on right now, the direction that it's headed in is the opposite in nearly every way. The data doesn't lie. It's pretty obvious the direction that the past year has set the party on, and it doesn't appear that there's going to be much change in it soon. So it's going to be up to us to actually get involved and change it. I will make one thing. I know that we got some criticism over this part about donating to the party, even though we disagree with what some of those funds are being used for, even to the ballot access funds, which technically could be used to do things like sue the Libertarian Party. If you can't stomach giving to the Libertarian National Party, give to the state affiliates. They all have needs. A lot of them have ballot access needs. You saw the map from before. Figure out a way to give to them directly. They're going to need all the help they can get, especially going forward over the next year or two with the Libertarian Party financially just not being in a good position. They're gonna those ballot access issues are going to continue, especially as the resources to fight those battles deteriorate. So ultimately join the CLC. That's the solution, right, folks?
Well, I mean, and I think that ties back to what you mentioned before. If you want to get involved in the Libertarian Party, one of the things that after 10 years of being involved in the Libertarian Party that I found out, and as a former state chair, is that knowing where to start is very difficult. And it's really hard to figure out where to get plugged in, how to get plugged in. It's different in different states, but at least in Tennessee, for example, we don't have ballot access. We're a smaller group. And so finding a place to actually get plugged in is very difficult. And I think that same story is everywhere, in many other states. So if you join the CLC, it's a really great pathway to find other people that are similar, like-minded to you in your state or in your area, find opportunities to get involved and get plugged in. And so I'd say joining the CLC is a great path if you're looking to get involved in LP activism with like-minded people.
We've got a great positive Discord that you can jump in. Even if you aren't a CLC member, there's an open part of the Discord. Love to see people there, kind of start these conversations.
There are non-CLC members in the open chat area, and it's always great conversation.
No, we do have a lot of great conversations. It's good. It's a good, healthy, positive environment, I think. So we try try to keep it that way. The moderating team does a really good job of navigating those fraught waters as well. One quick thing that I did forget about. Let's go down to the addendum real quick and take a look at some of these charts. We'll just glance over them. These compare, these were in response to, it'll be down here at the bottom. But this shows all the data that we use. So please feel free to take it. So this is response to using the 2-year cycle versus the 4-year cycle. Again, you can see the 2 cycles there. The one on the left will be the 2-year cycle. The one on the right will be the 4-year cycle. It shows the same results.
Yep.
The conclusion is the exact same. So you can criticize us for not using the methodology of your choice. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't change anything.
Doesn't really change anything.
Same on these charts
changes,
too?
Exactly. Same on these charts too. Left side is 2-year cycle, right is 4-year cycle. You can still see, okay, so if you do the 4-year cycle, we're down by 580,000 as opposed to, or we're down by 400. We're down by nearly 500,000. You use the 2-year cycle, we're down by nearly 600,000.
Yeah,
it's the same thing. It shows the exact same issues. So ultimately that's really what this report was trying to convey, is the actual real world state of the party. I think we conveyed that. I know that a lot of people didn't like our methodology. Again, do your own methodology on this. We released all of the report, all of the data that we used is on there. It's sourced. Feel free to do with it what you want. But we wanted to start a conversation about how to turn things around, because things need to be turned around. Hopefully everyone felt this was a good discussion. Hopefully we answered a lot of questions. Like I mentioned our Discord, I did ask in our Discord for people to throw out questions for this podcast to kind of take a look at. I appreciate Tyler and Josh for coming on. Do you guys have any other thoughts?
No, thank you for your work in putting this together, Jonathan. I think
we had a bunch of people working on it. So it was, we had a whole team for a month. It took us about a month to get all the data together from all different sources. I was calling executive directors from 20 years ago on some of this stuff. So.
I think it's really important, because transparency is hard to find in the current LNC, and this is a great service that I think is really important. So again, thanks again for that. And thanks to the CLC team. And thank you for your time, Tyler. Great job.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you guys for having me on. I always have fun digging through numbers. I will echo the thanks for your team, who did an incredible job pulling everything together. Not just the amount of work that it takes to compile a report like this, which I understand all too well, but also the level of transparency, Josh, like you said, being very open and upfront with where your decision points were, what decisions you made, so people could agree or disagree with them in terms of how you handled the data, and ultimately opening up and making the data set available to people so that they could look at it and make their own conclusions. That's an incredibly transparent way to do it. And also, I'll point the credit both to you guys for reaching out in advance to give an advance preview to the LNC, so that this isn't a gotcha blindside. And as I understand it, to Todd Hagopi and the LNC treasurer for reaching out and giving you guys advance notice of his response. That level,
he responded very quickly, and I can't think of it. We had originally planned on releasing the report about a week prior. And giving the LNC more than a couple of days to respond. Thankfully, they responded really quickly, and we were able to kind of address those issues. But yes,
I personally find that level of collaborative spirit and coordination, even if you guys have very sharp disagreements on some of the methodology, that level of professional courtesy is really heartening for somebody like me, who cares a lot about professionalism within our space, to see.
Right.
So both you and to Todd, well-deserved credit.
And for the record, I sent the report to the LNC early. I also sent it to the Radical Caucus. I also sent it to Heiss as well. I sent it beforehand to pretty much everybody I could think of that was in this space, and threw it out there. But I was very appreciative that the LNC did respond. Some a little more snarky than others. I'll let you guess who's those snarks were from.
Certainly, thank you to you guys, and thank you to your team for doing the hard work to get this out. Whatever conclusions others may draw from the report, I think it has started a very important conversation that we need to be having as libertarians. We're halfway through this LNC term. Things have not just gotten started. We're in the thick of it, and it's important that we, as members who are active and engaged within the party, have this dialogue about the direction things are going, and
Yes.
and whether we think things are on the right track or the wrong track. I can't see how that harms and can only see how that benefits the party. And lastly, I'll just thank anybody who is still here watching at the end of this like feature length podcast.
We're all nerds here, so
longest podcast episode ever.
I'm very pleased to have had that honor. I don't know if we hit like a compelling 3-act structure to hold everybody's attention, but I really appreciate anybody that was interested in enough in engaging in that really important and valuable conversation to have gone the distance with us. So thank you guys again for having me on.
Thank you guys. Thanks for everyone for watching.
Yeah, let's close it out. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.